This is about Nick Clegg, the British politician who caused Brexit and is now joining Facebook. And Facebook people might be interested to know a bit about his story. How did Nick Clegg cause Brexit? Well, because of his friendship with David Cameron, the leader of the Tory party. And it was a pretend friendship. David Cameron had once been asked, what's your favourite political joke? And he said Nick Clegg. And so these two pretend friends formed a coalition in 2010 after the Tories had failed to win an outright majority in the general election. And Nick Clegg was the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the third party in British politics, supported by 20% of the people, but with only 10% of the seats in Parliament, because we don't have proportional representation. And Nick Clegg's support for David Cameron came at a price, proportional representation. And David Cameron agreed, he had no choice. But he said, let's have a referendum on it. That always solves things quickly. And Nick Clegg agreed, he had no choice either. So we had this referendum on proportional representation, but David Cameron refused to support Nick Clegg because proportional representation would hurt the Tories. And Nick Clegg lost. And he felt betrayed, and he felt very angry about this. And in revenge, he refused to help David Cameron with his next reform, which was reducing Parliament, cutting 50 MPs from the House of Commons. Nick Clegg said no, that's not happening, even though Nick Clegg himself was committed to cutting 50 MPs from the House of Commons, following an expenses scandal. And this reduction of 50 MPs, if it had happened, would have made it likelier, not certain, but likelier, that David Cameron would win an outright majority at the upcoming election in 2015. So David Cameron, without this reform, needed extra votes. And it was easy to spot where they would come from. The sea. The migrant crisis had begun in Syria. If you jumped into the sea from Syria, you'd be fished out by a European boat, landed in Europe, and given EU citizenship. Syria had become an associate member of the European Union, so had Libya. And this expansion of the EU to include Asia and Africa was initiated by Germany. Germany wanted to show the world that it could be nice to foreigners. I don't know if you've heard, but Germany used to have a problem with foreigners. Britain didn't. Britain used to have a problem with Germany. And Britain didn't really like Germany opening up Europe to Asia and Africa, just so that people wouldn't call Germans nasty names. So voters in Britain said it's time to leave the EU. They wanted a referendum. And to attract them, David Cameron promised them a referendum in the general election, knowing that Nick Clegg wouldn't support it. Nick Clegg would be there to cancel it for him. David Cameron had found Nick Clegg very useful in government, a useful alibi. Anything that went wrong, Nick Clegg's fault. Nick Clegg won't support us. We can't do it because of Nick Clegg. Cameron and Clegg really had an abusive relationship, like the husband who stabs the wife and then claims that she backed onto his vegetable knife while he was making soup for the homeless. So Cameron fought the 2015 election promising this EU referendum, expecting not to win and to bring Nick Clegg back in to cancel it for him. But the promise of a referendum was so popular that Cameron won. He won an outright majority and he lost Nick Clegg, the alibi who would have cancelled the referendum for him. So we got our referendum. Cameron had no choice. But he made a mistake. He told us who to vote for. Vote to remain in the EU, he said. Very risky. Prime Minister says do this, it's a good idea. People say no, if you think it's a good idea, it's a bad idea. And in Britain we elect a Prime Minister indirectly through Parliament, which makes us feel very remote from politics until you have a referendum. And then politics is in your hands. The Prime Minister's fate is your mark on the ballot paper. You write your X like crosshairs on the Prime Minister's skull. So we voted to get ourselves out of Europe and to get Cameron out of Downing Street, and he resigned. The only Prime Minister to lose office because he won an outright majority in Parliament. And ultimately it was caused by Nick Clegg taking revenge after an earlier referendum about something completely different, proportional representation. And Nick Clegg got a knighthood after Brexit, Sir Nick Clegg, even though he had caused Brexit. And he hated Brexit, but he was knighted for opposing Brexit. The establishment hates Brexit. The establishment in this country hates the people, in fact, and regards the people as a dangerous and destabilising factor in politics, a bit like nuclear weapons. If the people could be uninvented, the world would be a much safer place. And Nick Clegg tried to overturn Brexit. He called for a second referendum. He tried to cancel this democratic act that had liberated us from the European Union. He fought democracy, he fought liberty, while leading a party called the Liberal Democrats. So Nick Clegg at Facebook, will he transform Facebook like he transformed British politics? I don't know. But it might be worth looking at his record with the Liberal Democrats. When he became their leader, they had 62 seats in Parliament. When he resigned, they had 8. So if Facebook starts to slide, don't say you weren't warned.